The Doctrine of Dualism. 1. Accustomed to instruct the masses, who throng him on public occasions, seeking light, the composer constructs this hymn for similar opportunities. And I've been recently bombarded with questions regarding Luciferianism, and I know this is going up late comparatively for that, but light bringing, it's a role. It has nothing to do with some conspiracy theory that people talk about. He may be regarded as continuing thoughts in the close of Yasna 28, where he besought Ahura to inform him concerning the origin of the world. He says that he will declare the counsels of God, by which, as we see, he means the great doctrines concerning the origin of good and evil. With these he will declare also the praises, the laudatory portions of the Mathra and the sacrifices, and he prays that perpetuous results may be discerned in the heavenly bodies, too. He further introduces what he has to say by telling the throngs before him that a decisive moment is upon them. They are to choose their religion, and not by acclamation, with the foolish decision of a mob, but man by man, each individually for himself. They should therefore arouse themselves and hear with all attention, and gaze at the holy fire with a good and receptive disposition of mind. 3. He then delivers the earliest statement of dualism, which has come down to us. There were two original spirits, and they are called, be it well noted, not two persons, or at least not only two persons, but a better thing or principle, and a worse one. The qualifying words are all in the neuter. At the next sentence, they are personified as a pair, each independently in his thoughts, declarations, and actions. Such is the short theodicy, followed at once by an admonition to those before him to choose the better. 2. These two spirits came together as by natural combination to make the opposing phenomena of life and its absence of heaven and of hell. And hell is described as a scene of cruelty inflicted on the innocent and the ignorant, but as the worst life, and heaven as equally remote from a superstitious paradise, that is, the best mental state. Well, superstitious surviving the idea that there's no afterlife or anything like that. I mean, how can we prove this? But the idea that it links to something here and you make your mind ready, sort of a paradise in a way here, by not suffering. Going through hardship is different than suffering, of course. This is the proper Zarathustrian creation. It is undeniably abstract, very unjust in proportion. As it lacks color and myth, are its depths visible. The account of it is also very limited, but it must never be forgotten that its existence is the probable proof that very much more of the kind existed besides it. Instead of there being one hymn sung like this, Yasna 30, there were probably many, the two original forces of beings, although separate, clearly come together, but they do not lose their distinction. Their difference remains as clear as their union. 5. They do not blend unrecognizably, for having created the two principles, they choose each his own particular realm. Ahura chooses the righteous order of religion, and with it the pious of all ages. The evil spirit chooses the wicked. The point and meaning of the entire doctrine is that a good God cannot be responsible for permanent evil. Well, because evil is a choice, hence the idea of counter-creation at its root. The beliefs and actions upon creation to, turn it against its original purpose. That imperfection and suffering are original and inherent in the nature of things, and permanently so. The swallowing up of sin and sorrow in ultimate happiness belongs to a later period. It is not Gathic Zarathustrianism. Evil was the work of an independent being. The great thinker saw his point, and it was that the deity himself could not prevent the evolution of base and revolting moral qualities, with their consequent miseries in both victim and aggressor. An evil god was therefore their author. Well, an evil entity. Orientalists tend to overstate the term god, because it's like everything religious is like a god. That's not true. There's a difference between a talisman and amulets and charms. And amulets and charms, I guess you do sort of treat the thing as a god, as like, it's praying for me, that sort of thing, rather than I look at it and, it's a spiritual piece of art or whatever. 6. But the blood feuds of war, not to speak of the theological animosity, were too much for his philosophy. The sage could not regard all men and their circumstances with broad and equitable impartiality. They hated Deva worshippers, who were doubtless equally conscientious with the Zarathustrians, are said to have failed of correct discernment. And we do find that the Yazidi, as we now call them, were certainly, they're up to 74 people that they recite. These people persecuted us. Now, Islam allowed freedom of religion, but not everybody that was Muslim did that. The Turks and the Mongols persecuted the Muslims too. So it's not like whatever. It's not funny, but it's funny that people are saying, oh well, it's religion. This religion. It's like, well, this group persecuted that religion too. As they were deliberating, so he recalls, the worst mind, a very real although abstract Satan, came upon them to induce them to choose him and his evil realm. They acceded, becoming furious in their intention to injure human life. This may be regarded as a dramatic, but at the same time, in a moral sense, a philosophical statement of a temptation and fall. For a later one, with more color and less truth, see the temptation proper of Zarathustra himself, recalling as it does so vividly the temptation in the Gospels. While certain models replay themselves, particularly with prophetic or even Messiah figures, sometimes they combine, like in Jesus, well, the Messiah Jesus anyways. 7. If we can accept the words ahma'ika to mean merely upon this, we may hold that the statements proceeded without a break. Even a gap of lost verses does not interrupt the sense. The clothing of souls with bodies seems indicated. If so, the doctrines of the Fravashas, otherwise foreign to the Gathas, may have its origin by inference here, and directly in verse 4 after the creation, and first activity of the souls of the archangels on the one hand, and of the Devas on the other, together with their respective human adherents, the one choosing good and the other evil. The remaining Ameshospens unite with Aramaete in bestowing a body upon the newly created soul. So we must conclude from the language. And the prophet breaks in with the prayer that in the future, and possibly at the Frashakard, the completion of progress, these created souls might possess such advantages as they had when Ahura came at first with his acts of creation, that is, that they might be restored again to a state of sinless happiness, provided with bodies of Aramaete as at the first. See Yas 29:89. 8. But as he implies and perhaps expresses in a lost verse, vengeance shall come upon the wretched beings who choose the evil mind as their master. And, if we go back to verse 2 here, or the explanation sort of verse 2, we have the idea of, the direction you face in prayer. Unless you're like worshiping a statue and you think that this is like the intercessor, whatever, the thing you face isn't necessarily, that's not necessarily like a god. You're building like this thought form that you're all working on. The ancient Egyptians talked about the Ka. It was like, you're directing your attention out somewhere, and it's sort of like a evocation in a way. That's certainly an element, but and it shall come, not in the abstract merely by any means, but is executed by a numerous, if not once, predominant party, the offspring of the evil mind. And when this shall have been completed, Yasna 31:18 shows us that weapons to be used to bring it about were not to be those of verbal argument alone. Then, as he declares with enthusiasm, to God shall be the kingdom, a kingdom established with divine benevolence, which will pervade its organic life, and which will likewise, as the personified immortal, utter encouragements and commands to its loyal citizens, and these citizens will then not only defeat the lie demon, who is the life of the Da'eva party, but they will deliver her up as a captive to the great genius of truth, the personified righteousness. 9. Oh, they didn't space it out here. Almost thought that was a footnote. And as he ardently hoped for the coming of the kingdom into the hands of Ahura, he as ardently beseeches that he and his coadjutors, the princes already named, may be honored as the immediate agents in bringing on the millennial completion. Nay, he even prays that they may be as Ahura's in merciful services, declaring that all their thoughts were centered in that scene where religious light dwelt as personified in her home. 10. Once more he announces the certain defeat and chastisement of the incarnate falsehoods and her adherents, which enables him only the more impressively to describe the rapid reunion of the righteous amid the home happiness of heaven. 11. Having delivered his brief but weighty communication, he commends his hearers for learning the holy vows of the religion on account of the duration of the announced rewards and punishments. They shall be long indeed, and upon their complete inauguration, full salvation shall be realized for those who shall have learned and heeded the invaluable truths. Translation. 1. And now I will proclaim, O ye who are drawing near and seeking to be taught, those animadversions which pertain to him who knows all things, whatsoever the praises which are for Ahura, and the sacrifices which spring from the good mind, and likewise the benignant meditations inspired by righteousness, and I pray that propitious results may be seen in the lights. 2. Hear ye then with your ears, and see ye the bright flames with the eyes of the better mind. It is for a decision as to religions, man and man, each individually for himself, before the great effort of the cause, awake ye all to our teaching. 3. Thus are the primeval spirits who, as a pair, combining their opposite strivings, and yet each independent in his action, and have been famed of old, they are a better thing, they too, and a worse, as to thought and to word and as to deed, and between these two let the wisely acting choose aright. Choose ye, not as the evildoers. Yea. 4. When the two spirits came together at the first to make life and life's absence, and to determine how the world at last shall be ordered, for the wicked, hell, the worst life, for the holy, heaven, the best mental state. 5. Then when they had finished each his part in the deeds of creation, they chose distinctly each his separate realm. He who was the evil of them both chose the evil, thereby working the worst possible results, but the more bounteous spirit chose the divine righteousness. Yea, he so chose, who clothes upon himself the firm stones of heaven as his robe, and he chose likewise them who content Ahura with actions which are performed really in accordance with the faith. 6. And between these two spirits, the demon entities, and they who give them worships, can make no righteous choice, since we have beguiled them, as they were questioning and debating in their council. The personified worst mind approached them, that he might be chosen. They made the fatal decision, and thereupon they rushed together into the demon of fury, they might pollute the lives of mortals. 7. Upon this, Arama'ete, the personified piety of the saints, approached, and with her came the sovereign power, the good mind, and the righteous order, and to the spiritual creations of good and evil. Arama'ete gave a body, she the abiding and ever strenuous, and for these thy people, so let that body be at the last, O Mazda, as it was when thou camest first with creations. 8. And when the great struggle shall have been fought out, which began when the dawn of us first seized the demon of wrath as her ally, and when the just vengeance shall have come upon these wretches, then, O Mazda, the kingdom shall have been gained for thee by thy good mind within thy folk. For to those the living Lord does that good mind utter his command, who will deliver the demon of the lie into the two hands of the righteous order, as a captive to the destroyer. 9. And may we be such as those who bring on this great renovation and make this world progressive till its perfection shall have been reached, as the Ahuras of Mazda. Even may we be like thyself, in helpful readiness to meet thy people, presenting benefits in union with the righteous order, for there will our thoughts be tending, where true wisdom shall abide in her home. 10. And when perfection shall have been attained, then shall the blow of destruction fall upon the demon of falsehood, and her adherents shall perish with her. But swiftest in the happy abode of the good mind, and of Ahura the righteous saints shall gather, they who proceed in their walk on earth in good repute and honor. 11. Wherefore, O ye men, humans, ye are learning thus these religious incitations which Ahura gave in our happiness and our sorrow, and ye are also learning what is the long wounding for the wicked, and the blessings which are in store for the righteous. And when these shall have begun their course, salvation shall be your portion. And ye are also learning. I think I didn't whisper that because that's in parentheses. So what is the idea that they're saying superstitious? What, everything that's not a Christian paradigm is superstitious? Like an exact, a just deity is going to make things count? So let me turn here. Ready made within us, the pious, verse 4 of a couple ago. The Pahlavi translator, unable to credit, ye as, or I who. So also, modern authority sometimes, with regard to other occurrences of ye in this chapter, renders as follows: when I shall be your own, thus for worship, and possibly deceived by the form of the words, Ufyani and Nafsman being nearly alike in the Pahlavi character, O Ashavahist and Vohuman. The first, U Harmad's, also his own hand shall be, through whose unweakened acquisition his rule over them exists, and hers also shall be. Spendermad's, the giver of increase, she comes to me with joy when I invoke her. When I shall call upon you, come ye on toward me with joy. A plain and noticeable instance of an alternate rendering in the gloss. The verb was the first thought as a third singular middle subjunctive, afterwards as an imperative second plural. And with the my in verse 5, we have men or m. The nasal vowel may represent man, or I may think also mam. And adverbially for mena or man or demana. Mount Alborg, where the Kinvat Bridge extends, is also important authority, but we might read menga evre or manga evre, Garodman. So we're talking something metaphysical here. Just like in the Bible, where if you literally translate it, it's like God's nostrils got big. It's like, well, they didn't really have a word for anger in the literal sense. So, Asha, a blessing giving and reward, so elsewhere. I think it better to hold the parallel passage and the sense of teach here in verse 5. The Pahlavi has an irregular form which probably means I teach, but might be intended for I am taught. After the words so long as I have power I will teach is rather more natural than I will learn. Haug's rendering of this word has never been accepted. Those most opposed to tradition follow it here. Perhaps I will teach the desire are. The Pahlavi translation of the end of verse 6, who talks righteousness within the souls, corrected by the manuscript, may be rendered thus: he who gives up his soul within Gorodman, the paradise of the hereafter, does so by the aid of Bohuman, and is also intelligent concerning the veneration which belongs to the doers of good works. So not the same as taking all these things as gods or something. And that which is Harmazd's religion. So long as I am a suppliant and have the power, so long do I inculcate the desire of righteousness, which is duty and good works. And the next verse, when I shall see in verse 6, Kada Mreli Kam Samana Abhe Kiam. Obedience throughout the Avesta and Parsi literature guides the soul to heaven. See, no one else does it for you. That's not superstitious. That's how things work in the real in the material world. So why shouldn't it work that way in the mental and the spiritual worlds? That doesn't mean that God can't have grace or do more than we deserve, but we got to do something, right? Our knowing the throne of Ahura, of the way in verse 6. A lot of religions talk about the throne, and some make clear that, the throne doesn't support God. The throne is greater than everything we can think of in creation. The seven heavens and this lowest heaven, the one with the stars and all, and there's other things that make clear that, So the Pahlavi, most scholars following, but the construction would be awkward. Finding the way occurs in the Riks, and Gatu need not always mean place in the Gothic, because it has that sense most frequently in the Zend. And further on in that verse, the supplication we must hold off. Possibly we may teach the foul-polluted men, or confess the greatest one with krafstra, slang, tongue. Perhaps. The text is to be amended, and you might want to see Yas 34, verses 5 and 9. The Pahlavi translation of the end of the verse, it's talking about spiritual foulness, may be rendered thus: O Asha Vahist, when shall I see thee? I know this, one by means of a good mind's instruction, that is, I shall see thee in the time when every man is intelligent, because he is pious. But when shall it be? And the place of Harmazd, when shall I see it? I who am suppliant for a benefit. That place is known through Srosh. That greatest of matras is to be taught, given forth with tongue to him whose understanding is confused. And in verse 7, and upon us the help. Because the help, if the prophet is helped with the message and stuff, it benefits the community, you can say. So that's, So as with the last one, I sometimes I don't know how much of the verse is going to be translated, but it's good to kind of render a second translation, I guess. I'm not sure how much they're translating is the point. So if I mess up a little bit with my extra comment with that, it will become clear when it's more than a couple words. It certainly involves a question as to the words to Zarathustra and to us can be compatible with Zarathustra's authorship. Vistaspa and Frasha Astra, verses 8 and 9, are equally excluded. Who then is the individual who thus refers to himself with others? And is this verse an interpolation? And with it, 8 and 9, this last seems to me a very feeble suggestion. Was this piece, together with the rest, for they are all connected, the work of some unnamed man of influence, the true author of Zarathustrianism? I think that there is also little gained by this supposition. Well, certain revival periods, but Zarathustrianism is sort of a Catholic faith that unites everything Persia under Zoroaster as the prophet, whether it's supported by his teaching or not. That, there is no particular reason why Zarathustra's name should have come down to us as the chief figure, while that of the prime mover failed to reach us. I should say that the piece was composed by Zarathustra and put in the mouth of a leading priest, or that it was composed with many others under his inspiration. Well, that's the point of revival sometimes, is they try to restore what they think was the thing, and a lot of what we know through the Pahlavi and otherwise is what might have been included, right? If it's not just translation of translation to translation. The Bible, for example, you pick up a Jewish prayer book, you're looking at like 4 of what we'd call languages, because, French is different than English, and, you see a lot of differences. Can there have been a school or family of Zarathustrians, religious poets, similar to the Vedic seers? And the mention of overcoming an enemy strengthens the probability of his view of a va-varo ema-idi, or va-uro ema-idi, is what it has there in verse 4. Okay, it's the end of 7. The good mind is now, as we should say, the spirit of God in the mind of God, and again in the spirit in the human soul. The Pahlavi renders pa-daksha in the next verse the best of spirits, I guess. Wait, no, that's in verse 8. Ruler as thou art, O Masa. Okay. And probably the original heard inspired words towards the end of verse 8 there. Compare Manius Haka Fwa Aunga, verse 12. So often, oral communications are figuratively alluded to everywhere. No literal articulation or sound is of course intended. Srava ya Emma, proclaim. Ner Yosang may be rendered as follows. Grant, O sanctity, this devotion which results from the priority, an error from misreading the character of the Pahlavi, chiefly his original, of the good mind, that is, make me so religious that prosperity may result to me from my good conduct. Grant thou to the perfect mind in or to the earth, so the Parsis understood Aramaete, the which that proceeds from Gustaspa and from my people. Grant praisers, O great wise one, kings who may be announcers of your word and bestowers of the arrangements for the service, be announcers of your word and bestowers of arrangements for the service, that is, who may teach thy word and render it progressive. And progressive doesn't necessarily mean that, you're changing the religion as time goes on or something like that. It means that it keeps progressing society, that you're bringing it out according to the new material or different psychological situations. It doesn't mean, The earliest occurrence of Asha Vahista, the Pahlavi, since the best thing that thou hast, thy religion, is better than all other things, the best through righteousness. And, so in verse 9 here, in the millennial renovation, as well as in heaven, where Vahista Mana is equivalent to heaven, the Pahlavi gloss has Aig Frashostar Va Habistan, E Frashostar Vad Tanu, E Pasino Hamai Naduki Padas Vadan, that is for Frashostar and the disciples of Frashostar forever, until the final body provide a benefit thereby. And possibly we see, and for me, 21. Oh, the strengthening of the grace in verse 10. May we not anger you with our prayers for these blessings. Kim me havyam ahrinag ano gusheta. I kind of stopped there. Ahrinano. Okay. That dasame may now be better referred to as a simple root with dasvare, or regard the more probable, because the Pahlavi and also freely renders, if it not so understood, the author knew the meaning of dasama, one is reminded, of course, of the dasa gava, and I should maybe, if I don't finish their prayers chiefly for the grace and for the words of revelation. The Pahlavi, with its peculiar view, 23. Okay, still in verse 10. Okay, the possession of the power. With its peculiar view of Anais not to be rejected too confidently, see the note on the other occurrence of it, is interesting, as corrected by the Persian manuscript, on account of not coming to you, O Harmazd, this I would not do. The Ashavahist also, I will not pain for the sake of a blessing, that is, I do not desire a single blessing which appears displeasing to Ashavahist. This turn of sense is followed by some who have hitherto opposed tradition, but I cannot follow it, although I value every hint of the ancient writers. Also, Mohuman, the excellent, I do not harass him, are, to those whom thou seest as creatures, full of the desire are attainments. So, satisfy my, in verse 11 there. And possibly the righteous, Ararthweng, Rita Vanas, the Pahlavi translation, E Fra Runo. And that's the note for the sublime in verse 11, around that part. And there's possibly I attain. Rangiso has Alanaso for Asuna, more correctly than the Pahlavi Asudak. Never void, so never without, not the same thing as some of these other things. Like I talk about void, and some people worship the void, and the void's a real thing, but that's not what we're talking about, just being without. It's not the same as the whole Belial thing.